Morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. My name is Ryan, and I want to thank you for joining my YouTube channel, The Power of a Low Carb Lifestyle. This will be my first official post to my YouTube channel, where in this particular YouTube channel, I'm going to talk a lot about the benefits of a low carbohydrate diet. We will talk about many topics in this space, including from time to time different recipes. We may even take a look at what studies reveal about the low carbohydrate diet and so forth and so on. I particularly take a lens when it comes to diet. I take a lens through the Bible, God's holy word. And I understand that not everybody's going to agree with that. And I even understand that you can have wide variety of opinions, even among Bible scholars, on what the Bible says about certain foods and so forth. But I just like to take a lens or take a look at my diet through the lens of the Bible. Even if you don't particularly, believe in the Bible, I still hope you will find value in some of the information that we go over here on this channel, because again, it highlights something that I believe is very important in um, human nutrition, and that is we're not getting adequate nutrition. It's amazing we're getting an abundance of calories from ultra processed foods and starving for nutrition. Well, this is where the low carb diet can become your friend. Today we're going to talk about fiber. But before I do that, I do want to make the disclaimer here. I am not a medical doctor. I'm not a nutritionist. I am just a guy who's battling metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, weight reversal, and things of that nature. And I'm finding solace and finding hope through the low carb diet. I'll go more into detail about my specifics in a later video. But today, this is a hot topic. What about fiber? There's many different views about fiber circulating in the low carb space. Would it shock you to know that I have my own thoughts on that too? Keep in mind, these are just my thoughts. There's a few ways that you can test fiber in your diet. Probably no more reliable way than through a meter, specifically a blood glucose meter or and a ketone meter. I personally like to check both. After all, I'm trying to reverse chronic conditions. And knowing both numbers really kind of helps me know how well I'm doing in my diet. Some people some people believe that you can have all the fiber you want on a keto diet. And it doesn't really matter which sources they're coming from. As long as at the end of the day you net carbohydrate a certain number, say 30 or 50 or even 20, that you're going to be safe and you're going to be in keto. But is that true? What's the best way to approach fiber? I'll tell you how I approach it in this video. First of all, fiber is a non digestible part of plant material. So if it's non digestible, it sounds like rubbish. Oh, wait, that's exactly what it is, isn't it? It's rubbish. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have value. Fiber comes from many things. It can come from your fruits, your vegetables, your grains, your legumes, your nuts, your seeds. And certainly, fiber has been proven to have beneficial impacts to gut health and to blood sugar control. But, and this is a big but, No puns intended here, of course. That's in the context of a high carbohydrate diet. It would make sense if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet that fiber is going to temper the response at least a little bit. It's kind of like the difference between getting hit with a bare fist versus getting hit with a boxing glove. Both are going to hurt, but maybe one hurts you a little less. And maybe that's the way to look at fiber correctly when we're talking about high carbohydrate diets. But what about when we shift what we're eating? What about when we up the amount of fat we're eating, lower the amount of carbs we're eating, and, moderating wherever is appropriate in the protein? That's a conversation for a different video. But when we reverse it, do we still need as much fiber as we did before? Let's take a look at that. One of the reasons why they recommend 25 grams of fiber for women, 35 grams of fiber for men, is because there's a lot of bulk that's moving through the digestive tract. So having that amount of fiber in your diet with the appropriate amount of water, and surely you're having enough electrolytes in that kind of diet, it should, under most circumstances, move the bulk through the body sufficiently. So to that reason, it probably worked. However, some people have IBS and other conditions, and they find that even more fiber can make it worse. What's up with that? Again, we're always under the assumption that we have these pristine bodies and that the fiber can just move through without harm. But when you have inflammation, maybe the wrong kind of fibers is a problem. So what I want to do is I want to divide two categories of fiber here. One that you get when you pick up a package, such as your favorite protein bar. And I'm not going to name any brand here because it's pretty much all going to be the same anyway. You're going to pick up the bar, especially one that says keto friendly, and it's going to tell you it only has 3 net carbs. And you're like, wow, 3 net carbs. That is great. Maybe it's not even sweetened with sugar alcohols, which they can sneak in all kinds of different sugar alcohols that do spike your blood sugar and classify it as a non-carbohydrate, at least non-glucose impacting carbohydrates, and that's simply folly. That's not true. Stay away from sugar alcohols. Erythritol might be the only safe one, but even then, you should be careful how much of that you even get. Maybe it's sweetened with monk fruit and stevia. These are, or even allulose. That's even better. But if they're sweetened with those things, okay, those are safe sugars. They're not even being calculated into the net carbs. Well, allulose might be, but monk fruit wouldn't be. Neither would stevia. So now you've got a protein bar that boasts how healthy it is. It's even sweetened with sweeteners that won't raise your blood sugar. So now you look at the bar, and the bar says 3 net carbs, but it's got 15 total carbs listed on it, 12 of which are fiber. And you think, oh, it's okay, it's just fiber. But what you have now in this bar is you have a product that's been pieced together in a lab and pieced together with machinery to make a product that's not what you see on the screen here. What you see on the screen here, that's real food. What you have in a lab, that's different. So my rule number one, this is just my rule, it doesn't have to be your rule, but it's probably a good starting point for most. If you're getting a package labeled food and it's not a single ingredient such as zucchini, we know what zucchini is. If they have to package it with information about its caloric intake and what's in it, Unless you're picking it up and it says carrots, mushrooms, asparagus, and sea salt, or some variation of that, it's not made from the same stuff that you see on here. There's a few packaged fruits, especially frozen goods, it'll be labeled like that. But if you're talking about like processed foods, like the protein bars and the protein powders and so forth and so on, you are far better off either leaving it alone altogether or counting it against your total carbs for the day. In other words, that 15-gram example I gave you of a protein bar, and most of them are higher than that, by the way. You should count that as a part of your total carbs for the day. In other words, if it says it's 3 net carbs, but 15 carbs are in it, treat it like it's 15 net carbs. So that's my first rule. The second rule that I go by is this: if it's the natural food founding this earth, and I believe in God's creation, those type of foods, we have long standing use in our bodies. We know what they do, we know how we respond to it. But just because it's in its whole food form, such as purple cabbage, does not mean that that food is necessarily right for you. You may have an intolerance to it. It may have too many carbs in it. A great example is a potato. A potato and beans, if you're metabolically healthy, you can tolerate foods like that as long as they're in their whole food forms and you don't overdo it. You can do that. But if you need to reverse chronic conditions, at least for me, I need to lower those foods, if not outright eliminate those from my diet until or if I'm ever metabolically stable and insulin sensitive, which that is my goal, is to get there, to where I can occasionally enjoy a food item like that, but still in a low carbohydrate zone. By the way, a low carbohydrate can be anywhere from no carbs all the way up to paleo level, which is about 150 carbs. I think 150 is a little high to call it low carb. To be honest with you, I think once you go over about 100 carbs, and that's total carbs, you're kind of leaving that space of what I consider low carb. And people can certainly vary widely between 0 and 100 depending on your lifestyle choices. If you can tolerate 100 carbs a day, you probably can do just fine with some lentils or some chickpeas or something like that in your diet. Fruit is another example. Fruit, unless it's savory fruit like an avocado or tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini, squash, some of the cucumbers along those lines, those are safe fruits. But if they're sweet fruits, I have to leave those alone because Ryan can't eat just one grape. I have to have a cup of them, probably 2 cups. So I just have to leave those alone. However, if they're largely the type of carbohydrates that we're seeing on this screen here, which is low carbohydrate vegetables, I do count only the digestible carbs in my total from it. So, in other words, broccoli, a cup of broccoli, which is on the screen here also, broccoli has 4 carbohydrates in a cup of it, but 2 of them are fiber. So, I am only going to count 2 carbs in that. It's in its whole food form, it's not manufactured in a lab, and it helps my blood sugar. It doesn't hurt it. So if I have a total allowance in the day of about 25 total carbs, right? When I say total carbs, let me rephrase that: 25 net carbs, which is the approach that I use. I approach the net number only when it's in whole food like this. So if I had that protein bar, I've already spent 15 carbohydrates, regardless how many net carbs it says it has, because to me, that's not real food. So if I'm going to have it, I'm going to have it as 15 total carbs, and that only leaves me 10 remaining, right? But that may be okay because I may say, well, I can have a cup of broccoli, a cup of cauliflower, half an avocado, and I'm there, and I'm fine. Maybe I choose to do that. That's fine. So again, I've given you the two rules. I've actually even given you the third rule as we've talked about it. But my third rule is even in its whole food form, don't eat the foods that are starchy and sweet. If you stay away from the carbs that are starchy and sweet, you're safe in your low carb zone, especially if you're in the reversing disease phase. So the three rules: if fiber comes from a packaged, processed, or ultra processed food, count total carbs. Rule number two: if you're eating fiber in its whole food form, like what you see on the screen, you can count net carbs for that. And then my rule number three is I stay away from the starches and the sweets. Now, is the benefit of having fiber in the diet? Well, we talked earlier about how the bulk can move through the body, and that's true. Fiber can help with that. It's got a long-standing history of helping with that. This is why people who've taken Metamucil, for example, have experienced relief by using that, right? But another growing science is the role that fiber can actually have in our gut health, particularly when it comes to prebiotic and postbiotic fibers. When we have fiber, and it doesn't have to be a lot, it can be 10 to 20, 25 total grams of fiber in your diet in a day. It feeds the gut bacteria, and they play a role in immune health. That science is growing. It's not settled in any way. Anybody who's telling you that the science is settled, they don't know what they're talking about because they haven't even figured out all the different kinds of bacteria and what the right combination is for optimal health. And, that's still being fleshed out. That's being worked out. It'll probably happen in our lifetime, especially with AI. It's eventually going to figure this out. I believe that. But until then, just have enough fiber in what you're eating in your natural whole food forms. If you're including vegetables, nuts and seeds, stuff like that, you should be okay. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today as we discuss the role of fiber in the diet. I'm going to end on this note. I believe that when God created this earth, He created everything in it that we need to sustain our health. And I believe that we can choose items from the biblically appropriate list and tailor to it to meet our individual needs, metabolic needs. If we were coming at this as children, never having been exposed to ultra processed foods, we'd have a wider array of options in the biblical diet. But for me, vegetables were part of God's creation. He told men that they could eat this food. Therefore, I choose to eat it. Whether or not you do or not, that's up to you. But if you do, I hope this talk on fiber will make sense to you. God bless you. Until I produce another video again, may God keep you and may you have success in your low carb journey.